Anahita Hosseini is our next speaker. She is a former member of Student for Freedom and Equality in Iran, also executive director of New Idol magazine, student magazine. Anahita was among some other students who were arrested on 7th December 2007, and I believe some of them are still in prison. Anahita was arrested mainly for her position as the executive director of New Idol. Ladies and gentlemen, Anahita Hosseini.
Thank you. Thank you. سلام میکنم خدمت همه دوستانی که امروز اینجا هستن و بهشون خوش آمد میگم. تشکر میکنم از حضورتون. من صحبتمو به انگلیسی ارائه میدم. Thank you very much for all of you who are here today to hear our voice. Before starting my speech, which is on paper, I would like to say how much it means for all of us, the Iranian students, to see the solidarity that you have with us. Nowadays, every day that we wake up, we just don't want to see the internet, we don't want to see the news because we know someone new has been killed, someone else has been tortured, or another friend of us is in prison. And it makes us feel so very bad, no matter that they are socialists, liberals, or reformists or anything, but just seeing what's happening to the students in Iran today, I think it makes every human being feel that it is our responsibility to stand for them and help them as we can. Thank you. "56 years ago, 3 students at Tehran University were killed violently by the foreign regime of Iran just because they had protested Nixon's travel to Tehran. And ever since, 7th of December has been a symbol of the resistance and the struggle of the Iranian students against dictatorship of any kind in 2 dictator regimes. And it has continued non-stop until the present day. The student movement of Iran, just as the student movements of other parts of the world, has been among the most progressive and effective movements in the society. And today in Iran, we can see the results of this permanent battle, the battle of the students who fear nothing and just they are going on with this fight in the surface of the society. We are seeing the result of all this braveness on the streets and how they are paying for freedom and for equality with their blood. In the past 30 years, the student movement has kept on struggling, albeit all the pressures and repressions against it. But it owes its unbelievable growth to its radicalization during the current century, I mean the past 10 years. The leftist student movement in Iran, frustrated from the so-called reformists and distrustful to change from outside of Iran and changes from above, appeared so strongly that not only it became the most massive and effective part of the student movement, but the rulers feared it so much that 2 years ago in these days and during a month, more than 70 leftist students, including myself, got arrested, tortured and mistreated. And as my friend Mr. Qasemi mentioned, in the year 2007, 90 students were arrested, that 70 of them were different socialist students, which shows the important role of the socialist students in the student movement of Iran. Even more students were deprived of studying and were threatened and pressured. This major repression was an enormous disaster for the radical body of the student movement. As we know, after we got released from the prison, we were all released on very, very big bails like $80,000, $100,000, and we were all going on trials and still being threatened and all these things. And there are people in there who are still in prison since that time and still under pressure and repression. So this was a very, very bad thing for the radical part of the student movement, as we know. And the student movement and we are still suffering these consequences of that repression that happened 2 years ago. When the mass movement of the Iranian people raised in this summer, our movement was on its way to stand up once again and learn from its past, of course. And in the near future, with the increase of the self-consciousness of the mass movement, it will rise stronger than today and even stronger than a few years ago. And we are seeing this again in the universities these days, that the radical parts have the answers, but the other parts of the student movement, not that they are not active, they are, but because they are not giving an alternative, they are kind of being pushed beside, and the radical part of the student movement and with the leftist attitude is having more and more effect every day, albeit all the pressures that it has bared in the past few years. The point that should be noted here is that when we are talking about the radical pioneer student movement, we do not mean that this movement has had some unrealistic radical demands while people in the society were going on with their daily lives without feeling any companion with this protest. But we mean during the past years, due to the special atmosphere of the universities that gave the students the chance to talk and act more freely, and due to the way students live because they have not yet been seriously involved with the daily life and its problems and fears, the students became the voice of people. In the path of proposing people's demands and fighting for freedom, Iranian students have feared nothing, not even death, and we are seeing that every day in Iran nowadays. In the past few months, that people also had the chance to show their protest in the streets, we saw that no real distance existed between students and people. And for once, after 30 years, we were seeing that all of them were together and everything didn't start and end in the universities. It started and ended in the streets with universities and the students supporting them. But of course, during all the protests, the students have been among the most effective and active and brave forces, and female students here, they should be mentioned, because more than 65% of the Iranian students are female students, and they are they came to a fatigue from all this double repression that they are bearing, and therefore they're playing a very, very significant role, as we know. In the past few weeks, many students have been arrested. Many of our friends and classmates are in prison cells and being tortured right at this moment. And this shows the fear of the COPE government from the influential, instruction-giving and accompanying role of the students in the massive movement. Today, the student movement of Iran is facing a special condition, an exceptional and a very historical phase. This movement is now synchronized with the massive movement of people to resist against the repressive government and combat for the most fundamental rights of every human being, and supporting the demands of the workers, women, and the rightful demands of the ethnic movements. In this path, it is neither counting on any factions within the regime nor any of the foreign governments, but only to the fighting people of Iran and other countries. When we go back to the history of Iran's students' movement, we can see that the most effective student organization, the Confederation of Iranian Students Abroad, had a very effective cooperation with the European student organizations, because the European student movement in general has always been radical and protesting against the existing situation. And this cooperation did not only have effects on the student movement in Iran, but also on the general struggle of the Iranian people against Shah's dictatorship. So I think that's what we should look forward to again in these days, that Iran is facing another revolutionary phase. Today, our responsibility as members of the student movement in exile is to form independent student organizations to support the struggles of the student and the people of Iran, just as the members of the Confederation did in the past. Our limited but positive experience in co-working with some of the student organizations while we were active in Iran showed us that there is a very promising perspective to such cooperation, as most of the active parts of the student movement and organizations in Europe still follow a perspective of fundamental changes, just like in the 60s and the 70s they did. In the end, I want to say that the Iranian student movement, along with the massive movement of the people of Iran and other liberating movements all over the world will go on until we prove there is an alternative. And we can make a more fair world possible through our struggles, because history never ends. Unity, struggle, victory. Thank you.